Well, hello again, and welcome to another episode of Sermon B-Sides. My name is Rusten. I'm one of the pastors here at Cormdale Church, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Pastor Jon. What's up, Pastor Jon?
Hey, it's Tuesday, and my back doesn't hurt today.
Yay!
Well, not as bad.
Yeah.
I can move. I can do this.
You're in a constant state of pain, but it's just lower than normal.
It's lower.
When you go to the doctor and they ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say your pain is at now?
Right now?
Yeah.
Well, it's more of like how much range do I have?
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm like 75% normal.
Cool. That's good. That's
Yeah.
better than walking around with a cane and earlier.
I was not good. And I got to go see a buddy tonight who's going to
Nice.
work on my back. So.
Nice. Well, glad you're feeling better.
Thank you.
So we're continuing we're getting back to Acts today.
Yes.
We're gonna get back into Acts. We took a little bit of a hiatus from Acts. I don't know.
So we're going through Acts, right? And then we took the break for Easter.
Yeah.
And then the first sermon back from Acts is Ananias and Sapphira.
Yes.
Boom!
It's like you haven't been,
Welcome to church.
all the new people that come and check you out during Easter.
Yep.
And then, you had a couple weeks of sermons based on
We did.
You did the woman at the well, which is a really fantastic passage to think about in terms of Jesus confronting our sin. We talked about that last week.
Yep.
And then after that, the Lordship of Christ, the Great Commission. And now you're in Acts.
We're
and it's
back
like,
to Acts.
now that the church is really feeling pumped up about
Here you
the
go.
Lordship of Christ and the mission, and then we have Ananias and Sapphira.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So what
Yep.
happens to those two church members?
Church discipline.
Extreme.
So they're struck dead individually, 2 different episodes. But before we go into the detail, I just think it's fascinating that sometimes you hear, especially like home church people, like, we just want to get back to the way it was in Acts. You're like, well,
Okay. How far back do you want to go?
how far back do you want to go? Yeah.
Well,
But it's an incredible story, and I think it really presents like good challenges us to in reading it, because you want to know why did Luke include this story? One of the things I said on Sunday was, like, Luke isn't giving us an exhaustive report. There's a lot of things that most of the things that happen we don't know. Luke couldn't record everything that happened every day, but he does record these things, and so there's an intentionality to the story, and I think that kind of makes you go, what does Luke want us to know? Why is this important?
I think that I was talking to some folks in my life group about this passage yesterday, and one of the things somebody had mentioned was that in the Ananias and Sapphira event, which is, thankfully it's not a normative thing that you just
Right.
dying at church all the time.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yep.
But there's a kind of grace of the establishing continuity with the Old Testament in terms of
Right.
saying God is the same God who is holy in the Old Testament is the same God who is over his church.
Right.
And it's kind of weird to think about it that way.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of tendency to divorce those two and to think of, like, there's a completely new disposition of God in the New Testament compared to the Old Testament, such that we had an episode a long time ago on Marcionism. This, like, there's this internal tendency we have to want to dismiss the Old Testament, even if we don't do it outright.
Right.
We have this disposition towards saying there's something is just radically there's radical discontinuity between the Old Testament God
because
and
the God of the Old Testament is embarrassing and offending.
yes, the God of the Old Testament is embarrassing and offending, and thank goodness Jesus shows up, not because he's our savior, but because thank goodness he shows up because he makes us feel better about being believers.
Yeah.
Because he's so, to put it harshly, but but this event in the church is no different than God striking down Nadab and Abihu.
Right.
God, if similar, they offered strange fire to God. They breached his holiness,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
unholy motivations, with not caring what his word says,
Mm-hmm.
but lying about God by not doing the worshiping in the way he told us to worship him.
Yeah.
And there's kind of like it was a special event. It's sad, Nadab and Abihu.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet, do people later in the story often breach God's holiness? Yes, but in the very beginning stages, the very beginning stages of God establishing his people and establishing the tabernacle and worship, you have Nadab and Abihu dying because they offer strange fire and don't care for the holiness of God.
Yeah.
And that sets the tone
Yeah.
for who is this God that we are dealing with. He's the true God. He's the holy God. He's the God who is withholding judgment far more than we know and understand.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think that sets the tone for the church.
Yes.
In the early stages. It's not normative. Thankfully, that's happening all the time, but it could be. Like,
isn't it funny that some of we'd call like the charismaniacs want to normatize everything in Acts when it comes to the apostles and the signs and wonders, but don't want to normatize that.
Like,
just as a side note, that's funny.
Well, I know right after this event, there's the apostles Peter's walking and his shadow is healing people, and it's like, people go, see, the healing goes on. It's like, well, do you want to also say the dying in church goes on too?
Yeah.
No.
So to the thing you were just saying, we were talking last night at dinner, and one of the questions that came up was like, well, why were they killed? Mm-hmm. They lied, but there's other liars.
Yeah.
Why were they killed? And I thought that was a really insightful question. I'm like, I think that you talk about tone setting.
Yeah.
The issue isn't that Ananias and Sapphira were unique in the fact that they had sinned, or that they had lied.
Yeah.
But there are times where God executes judgment on an individual or a family, and withholds judgment from everybody else, and it is a tone-setting judgment. It is a warning to everybody. Yeah. The way God dealt with their sin is the way he could have dealt with everybody's sin. Yeah. But he doesn't. But he does it as a warning.
Yeah, that's and it's captured in the book of Acts as it's like not just like, oh, this happened. It's like for us as believers, we should take that word and say, God is holy.
Yeah.
There's the God of the New Testament is the same God of the Old Testament. He cares for his holiness just as much as he did when he struck down Nadab and Abihu as he does now and today. And he searches the hearts of man, right?
Yeah.
I was just reading through Hebrews not too long ago about the word of God is living and active, and it pierces the division between soul and spirit and bone and marrow, and discerns our inner being.
Yeah.
And that God, that's the spirit that they lied to.
Yeah.
They lied to that spirit.
Right.
They lied, and this is the thing that gets me about the Ananias and Sapphira thing. These people were doing a good thing. Mm-hmm. By all measurements of looking at what was going on, like I can't say that I've given probably in the way that they have.
Yeah.
I've never sold all my property and given a chunk of it even to the church. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. How come that didn't come up in the elder application process?
I know. Well, think about it. It would be, how much more does this happen later? Like, meaning how many more church members decide to sell all their stuff and give it and like, okay.
or not sell it.
Exactly. But there's a what to our appearances and our observation would be a amazing self-giving act on the part of Ananias and Sapphira. Underneath it was a motivation that was evil enough that God struck them down dead. Yeah. And we might say, like, I think we very easily, you were talking about truth serum.
Uh-huh.
Like, well, if we all took truth serum, we'd probably think that Ananias and Sapphira were just, that this God doing this, God's being a little harsh, right?
It's excessive.
The reason why is because we think, man, they were being so nice.
Yeah.
It's like, so what if they wanted to look good to their neighbors?
Yeah.
So long as they wanted a little extra, like, they wanted to hold some back and make it look like they were better than they were. Like, is that really a big deal?
Yeah.
Yes, it is a big deal. It's a very big deal, apparently.
Yeah. My buddy Brian, he preached here years ago, and he talked about our tendency to sentimentalize the holiness of God. You know, so when you have like one of those kind of a story that maybe pulls at your heartstrings a little bit, it's like, well, God will just compromise on his standards. It's like, no.
Yeah.
God's holiness is God's holiness.
Should make us, and the response to this act is the church fears God. And
everybody's afraid.
Everybody's afraid, but the church, but
inside and outside,
and the word gets out. Man, you mentioned like this, two guys going out for a drink. Like, sure, what happened to that church?
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, man, I heard someone a couple died after they sold all their stuff and gave most of it to the church. They just happened to lie about it.
Yeah,
you want to check out that church?
No, run away.
But really. This came up in our life group discussion as well, but you don't fear what's fake. I mean, maybe you do if you fear a lie, right? But But they weren't fearing God because they were fearing God because they had to reckon with and encounter His holiness.
Yeah,
in a way that was devastating.
Yeah,
and in the life group as well, people walked away from that sermon thinking, "Whoa, my own heart examination, right? How often do I do what I do in order to just simply please others versus I'm doing it out of thankfulness to God and out of fear of God and in a truly not knowing letting my right hand know what my left hand is doing kind of a way.
Right.
And it's convicting.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize you're not messing with just an abstraction.
Yeah.
You're dealing with the living God.
Well, and it also, along with that, it emphasizes and stresses the point of like what does true obedience look like?
Yeah.
Like what is God after? And I tried to say this in the sermon, but I think it's important to thread the needle on what was the problem here.
Yeah.
Like, so because right now we're in the midst of social justice, chaos, Marxism stuff, you can read this and go, see, they were selfish with their money. But there was Peter tells Ananias, it was yours before you sold it. The land was yours. You could have done whatever you wanted with it. And once you sold it, the proceeds were yours, and you were free to do whatever they wanted. So it would have been better for Ananias to keep the money and be honest than to have given part of it and lied about how much he had made and how much he was giving.
Yep.
Like that, I don't know how else to read the text.
No, yeah. And so that puts a bit of a squash on this. What is God really after?
Yes.
God's really after wealth distribution. That's what he really cares about. Right?
Right.
It's like, no, God's after the heart.
The heart.
That fears him
above
all. God's after the heart that loves God with all its heart, soul, and strength, and that flows into our love for one another.
Yeah.
But we turn that on its head.
Yeah.
And we say God's really after these pragmatic outcomes.
Right.
And so we can achieve these pragmatic outcomes through all kinds of means, and we get into
programs,
all kinds of trouble
Yeah.
when we do that. Because when you think you can aim and hit the pragmatic outcome that God cares about without fearing him, you're going to go down weird roads. You're going to say, no, it's okay to support abortion because we're eventually going to get to the point where the image of God isn't being slaughtered in the thousands every day.
Yeah. The logic of that is
as much. We're going to, it's okay to support whatever, right? Because pragmatically it leads to less fill in the blank.
Yeah, in the end.
And I think that at the root of that kind of reasoning is just straight up lack of fear of God.
Right.
You want to select the option that says, yes, I'm willing to permit the daily slaughter of image bearers because I believe the outcome in the future will maybe be less of the daily slaughter of image bearers.
Yeah.
It's like, whose image are you? It's not your. It's God's image you're talking about, right? You should tremble at the thought of even being perceived as someone who would allow that. Like that's just.
Yeah.
I can't wrap my head around that, but like.
Or voting for a guy that would allow that.
Well, believing that voting for a guy who is all about that.
Yeah.
Like pays lip service to the
100%.
value of God, God's image. Pays lip service to it and says, but we should still absolutely let it be slaughtered in the thousands every day.
Yeah.
Legally.
Right.
And there's no fear of God in that.
Absolutely.
So
when you land that plane back here, it can result in obedience looking very different than what you want to assume it would look like.
Yes. Yeah.
So if Ananias tell me what you think about this. Ananias and Sapphira sell the property.
Yeah.
Right. There's no prearrangement of what they're going to do with the money. They sell it. Yeah. They keep the money. They put the money in a safe or whatever. Yeah. There's no problem with that.
Yeah.
They're not obligated to do anything.
Yeah.
That would have been okay. But to give some and to lie about it was externally, we look at it and go, oh, see, they're generous, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is that was an offense to God's holiness.
Yeah.
It would have been better for them to keep it and be truthful than to. So getting at this, like, God uniquely detests fake obedience.
He did. Now, he did. And I think, you could make the case that this particular instance says how much he hates fake obedience. But hates, like, the Nadab and Abihu thing is similar. They looked like they were doing something priestly and worshiping of God, and yet what they were doing was contrary to what he said, showing that they did not submit to what he wasn't their primary concern, right? Because if he was, they would just listen to what God said and do what he said, right?
Yeah.
In this situation, God wasn't their primary concern; it was something else. Right?
Yeah.
And so now to flip that a little bit, okay? So let's flip it just a little bit when you think about if Ananias and Sapphira had sold their property and had kept the funds and maybe given $2 to the church and said, this is what we can cheerfully and honestly give right now. We feel really embarrassed because Barnabas gave everything, but this is based on what we're doing. We can and want to give this.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Ananias and Sapphira meet someone that has a neighbor who is struggling financially, can't feed themselves, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
There is a moral obligation that we have to love our neighbors.
Yes.
How does that play out because what I see is the laying at the apostles' feet is like, we don't really know where this is going, but we want to give in order to see it go out.
Yeah.
Versus the specifics of God puts people in your life.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're called to love them.
Yeah.
And that love, God doesn't prescribe what shape it takes.
Yes.
But he says we're to love them.
Love them. Yeah.
And so what does that look like? I mean, what are scenarios you can imagine?
So great question. I don't know who it was. So I heard this from somebody, or maybe I read it somewhere. So this is not an original idea, but I thought the answer helps with this situation.
Okay.
I think it's brilliant.
Okay.
The guy said, in those situations, God does not give you a checklist of what to do and what percentages to give.
Yeah.
But he commands us to love our neighbors. And the command, right? If God gave us the checklist, we could just go do it and move on.
Yeah.
But God has given us the command to love our neighbors, and obedience to that looks like faith and fear to God.
Yes.
To go, God, I don't know what loving my neighbor looks like, but I know you've called me to do it.
Yeah.
And here are some resources that I have. What would you have me to do?
Yes.
Right? And so then you have love and faith motivating the work rather than, okay, I just need to do this, and then I've loved my neighbor and now I'm done.
Yes. I think that this is one of the tensions that I feel with this subject of it's one of the things that the social justice folks have latched onto, right?
Yeah.
Because they're motivated by ostensible love, right? They're motivated by the belief. I mean, some of them that this program of wealth distribution is actually loving, right? Now they in order to get there, you kind of have to throw out the whole, thou shalt not steal thing. You have to, because you have to coercively, in order to do wealth distribution, you have to coercively take money from people and say, you don't get that money. You have to give it to these people.
Right.
And I don't care who they are, rich or poor.
Right.
I mean, and here's the thing that's kind of ridiculous, is that a lot of these programs are based upon taxes that do impact the rich just as much as the poor. Like gas, like you've mentioned, gas taxes.
Yeah.
Like the guy who has a business, it's just him and his truck, but still has to pay an exorbitant amount of taxes on the gas.
Yeah.
And the gas companies themselves are taxed, so they increase their costs.
Yes.
In order, and that impacts them.
Yep.
So it's like there's a whole bunch of complexities there.
Yep.
But
Yep.
the motivation is ostensibly driven by love, but it's not driven by love in the I fear God. In this, I have this situation, my neighbor's before me, and I am called to love them.
Yeah.
Like my neighbor, your neighbor is like the Good Samaritan thing, right? The story of the Good Samaritan. The question is, who's my neighbor?
Yeah.
And that parable doesn't say your neighbor is the general poor out there.
Yeah, yeah.
It says the neighbor is the person you walk by, and God's put them before you.
Yeah.
Like,
I always thought that who is my neighbor, like that was a question that was intended to limit the responsibility, right? Who's my neighbor implies, well, who's not my neighbor?
Yes.
And I always thought the answer is like, love doesn't ask who's my neighbor.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think
Whatever need is in front of me, that's my neighbor.
yeah. And that instance of caring for the neighbor who is on the side of the path beaten up.
Yeah.
Like, could the Samaritan have loved that neighbor without having actually gone down the path and seeing him, right?
Yeah.
And so what I think that some of this, the way we talk about this issue and caring for the poor, neglects the look around you at the people around you that God's put in your life, and how is it that you see needs that you can meet?
Yeah.
And a lot of times we dismiss that because we say, well, the government's taking care of them.
Yeah, there's a program for that.
There's a program for that. And it's interesting how what that does is it's the pragmatic solution without having the heart. You can have the pragmatic solution without having the heart. And then it turns out the pragmatic solution has all kinds of problems all by itself anyways.
Yes, right.
So, I think about this issue, and I think I'm fairly anti-social justice welfare distribution. I mean, it's probably pretty clear, but I never want to. I'm not.
That doesn't mean you don't care about the poor.
No, and I think that the sad thing is that in our discussions today, if you're anti-monopolizing the state to take care of people, so that you don't have to actually care about people, so you don't have to actually fear God with your resources, that for some reason is seen as people are the poor, they don't, and you're one of the people that don't. And so that's a little I just think that's this text combined with like the Good Samaritan text and the call to love your neighbor is so much more than just assenting to some program that is going to result in some neighbors being not loved so that other ones can be loved. So it's like there's all kinds of God's not after that pragmatic outcome. He's after the heart.
The heart, right?
And
right.
And when he goes after the heart, when the heart is changed, the pragmatic outcome follows in a way that we haven't been able to even we wouldn't be able to comprehend.
Yeah, and you see that actually in Acts. So Ananias and Sapphira is an example of them wanting to fake the obedience and to lie about holiness. But the other examples that Luke gives in Acts 2 and Acts 4 are actual, they're genuine.
Yeah.
Like nobody's telling them what to do.
Yeah.
But they want to give.
Yeah.
And they're giving like abundantly. And they're even saying, and it's even beyond the, hey, I have a neighbor who has a need, but these resources are being distributed at the apostles' feet, and the church is being nourished and cared by these resources. And it's not like, what's being sold is significant. It's lands and properties. It's not, I sold my baseball card collection, so here's $100 or whatever. Like
You're lucky.
These are significant things.
Yeah.
But they are happening as people are being, moved by the Spirit of God and the grace of God in Christ and loving each other, and that's what's driving all of this.
And the crazy thing is that Peter calls it out as not lying to men, but to God. But on the face of it, it probably just looked like they were lying to men.
Yeah.
Because they were putting forward, they told Peter they sold it for a certain amount that it was not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So they were lying to men, but what's the point is that they were lying to men in order to, because their heart was really deceiving God.
Yeah.
They were basically, it's like you make the approval of man your God, right? And they were lying about who their God was in their heart. Their approval of man was their God, not God himself.
Yeah, one of the questions came up last night at the dinner table was, why were they trying to deceive God? Didn't God already know? You're like, yeah, and it's very much like Genesis 3.
Yeah.
Where God comes in and he starts asking questions, but God already knows what's happened.
Yes.
So let me ask you a question. This got asked, I think, last night at a dinner table too. Were Ananias and Sapphira, were they believers?
That got asked last night at our small group discussion too.
What a good question.
Well, we are not given definitive answers on either of those things.
That was my answer.
But, I mean...
So one of my boys he goes, Dad, Jesus died so we don't have to fear the judgment of God.
Yeah.
I said, yeah. So then why did God judge them? Were they not believers?
I mean, I think that there was
an insightful question.
Somebody made the case that no, they were not. If they were lying to God, they were not. And I think that this is one of the things that came up in our discussion last night was this idea of how we can be lying to God about our belief in Him, right? We can, and that's a scary thought.
Yeah,
that's a scary thought that we can actually live self-deceived about whether or not we are actually putting our trust in Christ, and that's. That hit some people pretty hard and terrifying.
Yeah.
But then you live on this continuum of God is mortifying your sin over time.
Yeah.
And so you may fall into the sin of seeking the approval of man above God. Yeah. And then God by his Spirit wakes you up to that. I mean, this is Peter talking.
Yeah.
Peter, the guy who denied Christ.
Right.
The guy who denied Christ looks and says, why have you lied to the Spirit?
Yeah.
And he doesn't say, I strike you down dead.
Right.
It's just the Spirit does it.
Yeah.
God does it.
Yeah.
And in some ways that must have been as humbling to Peter as it was terrifying to everybody else, because Peter's looking and saying, remembering the words of Jesus, Satan has asked for you to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you.
Yeah. Yep.
That's humbling, and I think so. I don't know. I tend to probably think that they were not believers.
They were not.
That's my tendency and belief, because I do not know. And then you get into weird stuff like, okay, the guy who reached out and touched the ark.
Yeah.
Right. Was he in the old covenant and union and faithful? So you have maybe he was, and this was just God saying, your time is up, because it's the
Judas.
Yeah.
I know there was something on Facebook. Gosh, this was years ago. Yeah. I think I posted something about Judas because it was in a text and Judas is a believer and all this stuff, and I'm like, oh, okay, wow. But there's a question. He was one of the disciples. Yeah. He had access to everything. He heard everything.
Yeah.
He denied Christ in a different way from Peter, but it was every bit of denial.
Mm-hmm. The difference is that you don't hear Jesus say, Satan has asked for you and to sift you like wheat, but I've prayed for you.
Yeah.
You have Jesus saying, I have kept all except for the son of perdition.
Yep.
Talking about Judas.
Right.
So, it is a humbling passage. When you read it, you should read it in a way that you are as terrified as the people who witnessed this happening.
Yeah.
That's how you know you've made contact with
fear.
The reality of the text.
Right. Because everybody heard about it and it was fear.
Yes, but to your how you ended this sermon was one of my sticks with me.
Oh.
Because you talked about how this is just not a good church growth strategy, right? By all means and purposes, this is like not the kind of thing you want your church to be known for in the community. Hey, Coram Deo Church, where people are dying, dropping like flies because of God's holiness.
Yeah.
Ooh, I'll pick another church.
Nobody dares do anything with them.
Yes.
Right?
There's so the crazy passage is this, right? None of the rest dared join them, but the people held them in high esteem.
Yeah.
And more than ever, believers were added to the Lord.
Yep.
Multitudes of both men and women.
Was it identified as men and women?
Yeah.
Or just
Men and, yeah. Sorry, there weren't any others.
So binary.
So, how do you reckon with that? We kind of touched on it a little bit, but it's the true God.
That is an inescapable takeaway, and I think like right now with what's happening, I felt like that was such a we needed to drive this point home because here is an instance of the church and something is you have the judgment of Ananias and Sapphira, and they're struck dead, and it's not just that in the text. There's also the healings that are going on, right? And Luke is very. I mean, he mentions it 3 times. Fear. There was fear inside the church. There's fear outside the church. Nobody had, dared had anything to do with them, and yet people are being added to the numbers, and it just so, I think, exposes and reveals the ridiculousness of the church philosophies that we're prone to buy into. That says, the truth is not what really matters. The holiness of God is not what really matters. What really matters is that people come and have a good experience and you're seen in a positive light in your community. And then those people will come and it's like the truth matters.
Yeah.
And God matters.
Yeah.
And the only way you can explain what's happening here, like how is it that there's fear and yet the church is growing?
Yeah. They met the real God.
They met the real God. That's it.
Yeah.
And I think that's our hope. That's what we have to cling to is church better be the place where people encounter the God of the Bible as he is, not a polished up, re-represented, PR. Let's just show people what we think are the nice parts, but God.
Yes.
God as he is.
Yes.
That's right. And I think
I'm humbled by that thought because I think it's just so easy to fall into the trap of shaping everything you do by pragmatism. People get frustrated that, if you go and tell people, if you're just honest with everybody about the gospel.
Yeah.
If you were honest with people at work about the gospel, if you were honest with your friends about the gospel that don't know Christ, do you know how many people would walk away thinking, I should never do that again. It never changes anything.
Yeah.
I should never tell the truth again. It never changes anything, right? There's a part of me that goes, you know what? The Spirit is the one who does the change.
Right.
You are responsible to speak truthfully, regardless of how it changes. You got to do it. Learn how to do it good. Learn, but you only learn those kind of things by actually doing it. You're never going to learn it if you never do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm humbled by that because I'm humbled by the need to do that myself. But there is a straight up tendency to just think that the outcome determines whether or not I speak truthfully. And tell that to Isaiah.
Yeah.
Isaiah 6. God says, it's the favorite missionary call.
Yeah. Except for the second part.
Who will go for us? Whom will go for us? Who shall we send? Here I am, send me. Yay, Isaiah. Let's be like Isaiah. Let's raise our hands and say, here I am, send me. God, I'm ready to go on a mission. He says, okay, great. You're going to talk to everybody. No one's going to listen to you. They're going to hate you. They're going to put their fingers in their ears. They're never going to want to hear it. You're going to be completely ineffective. Actually, your preaching is going to result in them having a hardened heart.
Yeah.
So, and then he goes, for how long?
Yeah.
And then he says, well, and basically until the city is in ruins, and then and then you go to the grave. Can I have a retake? Can I have a redo on my "Here I am, send me"?
Yeah.
But I just think we need to we need to be smart. We need to think about how we use our words. We need to grow. We need to learn how to speak in a way that's clear, but we need to not let the outcomes be the thing that shapes whether or not we tell about it. Because I can guarantee you the tendency to weigh everything by practical outcomes results in a church and people who just don't teach the gospel, aren't willing to tell their friends about the gospel.
Yeah.
Because you're right. If you tell your friend that, they're probably going to think you're crazy, but still be their friend.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of the things I love about Brian Bailey. That man loves his neighbors so much. He actually tells them about Jesus.
Yeah.
He tells them about hell.
He was just telling me about that yesterday.
Yeah.
We had lunch, and he was talking about it in an exchange he had with a delivery truck driver, like, to pray to receive Christ during the delivery. I'm like, that's awesome.
Like, he will.
I want to be more like that.
One of his sermon illustrations. We just talked about Brian. I love. This is the iron sharpening iron of the church, because he has things that I don't have that I want to grow in, and like, he has a friend. He weeps over his friend, his neighbor who doesn't know the Lord. He's like, I just knew I had to go over and I had to tell him about hell and how much he needs Jesus because he's bearing his sins, and Brian didn't do that for the approval of man. He didn't do that for the approval of man. He did it because he feared God and he loved his friend.
He did it because Christ is so worthy.
Exactly. He did it because Christ is so worthy. So you just brag on Brian for a little bit, but there is now, to kind of lean into what you called the church to lean into, there is a tendency now to just kind of feel like, hey, we don't. All this like talking clearly where the world is really muddy and wants to stay muddy is not helping. Like, I'm sorry, but if you say transgenderism is a sin, like, you are not contributing to the success of the church and the message of the gospel. Right. If you do, whatever, if you go use the scripture to answer the question of what justice is because you believe that a false definition of justice is leading people down to a path where they follow a false savior. Like
an injustice.
Yes. So they're people who just want to say peace, peace. Just peace. Let's all just get together.
Right.
And I want to get together and be responsible for one another. I want to have actual conversations where we disagree. Yeah. But to say peace, peace, shut up. Peace, peace, stop speaking the truth. Yes. Because it offends people. Peace, peace. Like, that's like the prophets of old. Jeremiah and Ezekiel both say, these prophets that say peace, peace when there is no peace, God is going to come and judge them.
And it feels like, you're kind of coming full circle to this false obedience. Yep. Right? You're lying. You're lying about God. You're lying about the truth when you say peace, peace, and there is no peace. You're doing what Ananias and Sapphira did. Yes. Ugh. Yeah. And it's easy to talk about it. Yeah. I struggle with that. I want to be a people pleaser I want to keep the peace, meaning I don't want anybody to feel like they can't. Rusten's going to tell me about the gospel. Or we are on polar opposites of how we believe what we believe gender and humans are. Right. And so, but if you don't speak truthfully, who will? Who will tell your friend about the truth? Well, when Paul talks to Timothy, he talks about the church being the pillars of truth. Yeah. Yeah. It's like the church is light in the world, and part of what it means to be light is the church tells the truth. Yes. Yeah. We tell the truth about where we come from, why we exist, how we grow, how we flourish. We tell the truth about God creating man and woman in His image, male and female. He created them. It's because no one else is going to say that. Yeah. No one else can say that. Yeah. Right. And when the church punts on that vocation, it just ceases to be the church.
Yeah. And you see, I was reading Revelation, Jesus' letters to the church.
Oh, yeah.
Because one of the things this is a long episode.
Let's do another one on Revelation.
Okay.
Should we do that?
Yeah, we'll come back.
Okay, so that's a promise. We'll do one on Revelation. Because we're both reading it. I've been reading through it a couple weeks, over and over again. There's some things there that
the church just needs to hear.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Let's put a pause.
We'll put a pause on it. Till next time.
Hey, thanks for joining us. If you have any questions about Sermon B-Sides, as usual, you can write us an email at pastor@quorumdeochurch.com. truthfully.org. Until next time, trust Christ, go to church, and love your neighbor. Peace.
See you guys.